Let me begin by reminding you again and thanking the three organizations that make this series of talks possible. The first one is the Judson Memorial Church, a very famous old church that you are sitting in at this moment, the church on Washington Square, as it was called in the 19th century. And we are very grateful for the generosity and kindness of the Judson Memorial Church to make this space available for these monthly meetings. The second is the Left Forum, the biggest annual gathering of left academics and activists in the United States for many years. It will again be happening in 2017, this year, June 2nd to 4th, if you're interested in making a note. And at the same place that it's been the last few years, the John Jay College of the City University of New York, with its entrance on West 59th Street between 10th and 11th Avenue, the far west of 59th Street. And the third organization is Democracy at Work. They're the ones that I work with most closely. I am on the board of the Left Forum, but the major focus I have is with Democracy at Work. And that is the group that promotes, produces this event, the weekly radio show that I do, that I know some of you do listen to, and all the rest of the activities that we engage in. So first, I want to, in addition to thanking these three organizations, I want to also thank one of the numerous organizations that have very kindly agreed to sponsor these monthly events. And by sponsor, I mean financially help us to defray the costs. As I believe I've told you, Brian, who is the videographer in the back of the room, produces this literally overnight, and it will be up on YouTube tomorrow. And it is seen all over the world by many, many, many people. It's very gratifying for us, but of course all this kind of thing costs money. So the organization that is sponsoring this evening's event is called Lefty Poll, Lefty Poll. And I thought you might be interested too in knowing a little bit about them. They are a collective of people engaged in pretty much what the name suggests. And if you're interested, please go look them up on the web. They are an interesting group of people, and one that we're very beholden to because they were interested enough to sponsor tonight's event. And if you who are watching this on the internet are part of a group that would like to encourage and support what we do here, please get in touch with us through our website, which is very simple, Democracy at Work, all one word, .info, Democracy at Work at INFO. I also want to inform you, if I can find it on my email here, which is sad that I can't, that this Sunday, by the mysteries of modern technology, I will be appearing, or at least for those watching on the internet, I will be appearing with Edward Snowden. Who are the other people? I've already forgotten them. I'm really sorry about this. This is all being done from Munich, Germany. It's international. 4 of us are talking about the crisis in the world. You may not have noticed it, but a lot of people seem to think things are falling apart. And certainly if you look at our government these days, any other conclusion would be bizarre. Anyway, we're having a conversation, and you can watch it if you're interested. I hope before the meeting is out, Shane, if you could get Betsy to come up here and help me because I can't get it off my machine. I wanted to let you know about this event. You can watch it. It's Sunday in the afternoon, this coming Sunday. And it will be an interesting international attempt to understand globally what kind of things are going on with people who are, as you can tell, very much involved. Yeah, that's what I need. I need some help. Yeah, it'll be promoted on our website. and through our Facebook and Twitter and all the rest of it, we'll be telling you exactly what time and where, so you can get it from the web also. But I'm hoping that that Betsy Avila, who works with us, may come here and provide the information that I am sad to say I don't have. I don't want to take too much time from our work tonight to do. She's not there. Okay. Sorry, that's my limited technological capabilities. Okay, let's get involved then in the material for tonight. Since last we met, many things have happened. I want to go over the one that caught my attention today, as it probably did yours, that very briefly, that a week or 10 days before the election, the intelligence agencies, clearly a misnomer, but nonetheless, the intelligence agencies of the United States released information that they had been given some information. They didn't know if it was valid or not, but it might be pertinent. That's what they told us. And a few days later, they said they had looked into it, and it wasn't. By which time the election may have been changed. We'll never know. And here we are, a week or 10 days before the inauguration, and the same intelligence agencies have announced to us that there's some very important information. They're not sure it's correct or not, but they wanted us to know that there was some important information that might be true, and they were going to look into it. This doesn't normally happen. Intelligence agencies don't do this sort of thing. They don't make this sort of stuff public. If you're not familiar with it, intelligence agencies are given materials about important people 10, 11 times a day, all year round. And they don't normally discuss that they have been given such information. And it doesn't matter who gives it to them. So the important thing here is that this is being made public as a kind of public theater for all of us to enjoy or to groan about. And the only interesting question for all of us is why? Why this theater? Who is doing this and for what reasons? Since the ostensible reality is too laughable to be taken seriously. And it is something for you to think about, because if ever you wanted a symptom of what I've been trying to explain to you, that this is a system that doesn't work anymore, that is economically dysfunctional and rapidly becoming politically and culturally dysfunctional, this spectacle, culminating in today's New York Times, is certainly overwhelming, for me anyway, overwhelming evidence. Okay, since there's not much of economics in what I just said, let me get on and get to the material I'm supposed to get to. One of the issues that's coming up already in the news, and you're going to read a lot about it, is the repeal or reform of the Affordable Care Act, usually known as Obamacare. One of the signature achievements of the Obama presidency was to get a bill through that had originally two intentions. One, to cover more of the people that are uninsured medically in this country. We are the only advanced industrial country with tens of millions of people that have no medical insurance. We are completely in the forefront in that regard. And this was a bill that passed and reduced that. Didn't eliminate it, but it reduced it. And the other thing it was supposed to do was to reduce the costs of our medical care. There would have to be called an utter and complete failure. It did increase the number of people that were insured, and that's certainly a valid and good thing that it did. It did not reduce the cost because it didn't go after the problem of cost in the medical care. And again, just to remind you all, we have, we have hospitals, doctors, insurance companies, and the drug and medical device producers. Those are the four industries. Together they comprise something we should be calling the medical industrial complex, right? The way we, with Eisenhower, learned about the military industrial complex. Well, we have a medical industrial complex. They work together, and together they make sure that the insurance covers the high prices of the drugs, and the high prices of the drugs make them look away from the problem of the high price of the hospital and the high price of the doctor and all the rest of it. And so they work together. They have their tensions among them, they do, but they also work together, which makes the United States also a pioneer. We spend roughly 18% of the total GDP in this country, the total output of goods and services, we spend on medical care. No other country on earth comes close to that. The cost of medical care in many other countries is half or less than that. Places, you know, remote places like France or England or Germany, Italy, those kinds of places that are clearly way behind us, where people are dying on the streets every day and only get to be 30, 40 years of age before they keel over, all of that. So we are a society that overpays, and that bill didn't solve the problem. So now we see that the president wants it to be undone, and the Republican majority in the two houses want it to be undone. So my guess is it will be undone. And so the question really is, why? Must have been wondering to you, is it that there's a principle that we shouldn't insure people? That it is somehow better to have millions of people with no medical insurance? Is this an ideological commitment? Is this a principle of some sort? There are some people who talk like that, but not many, not many. And so I don't think we have to go there in some obvious way to look for the answer. Well, is it then perhaps something else? Could it be that perhaps the big industrial combines, the medical industrial complex, got together and wants to undo this bill? And the answer is no, because they basically got the bill they like. With more people insured, that's more business for them, paid business. They weren't required to lower their costs, none of it. So there would be no reason for them to go on the warpath to undo this. They got pretty much what they wanted, which is no government restriction on how much they can charge us for medical care, medical insurance. Well, then what is the reason? The reason is simple. How was the extension of medical insurance in the United States, how was it paid for, especially the government's role in the exchanges, in subsidizing poor people and all of it? How was it paid for those of you who don't know? It was paid for by two taxes. A 0.9% Medicare tax on earned income over $200,000 per individual or $250,000 per couple. And on top of that, a 3.8% net investment income tax on income from wealth. That is, money you get not from a wage or a salary where you're paid for your work, but rather income from wealth if you own stocks and bonds. You with me then? The cost of Medicare extension of the Obamacare was a tax on rich individuals, 0.9%, people who earn over $250,000 a year as a couple or $200,000 as an individual, and 3.8% on people who get income from wealth. And by the way, not all people, but only people who, again, have $250,000 or more. If you earn $100,000 and you have some stocks, you're not covered under this tax. You don't have to pay. In other words, folks, Obamacare was paid for by a tax on the rich. And that's why it has to go. You understand? The Republicans and Mr. Trump want to give to the rich the tax cut. He couldn't admittedly say, one of my first acts is to give rich people a tax cut. It doesn't sound good. So instead, he's getting rid of the medical thing that imposes on us the blah, 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 blah. But the issue is that Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, one of the most important government in Washington think tanks that produces really good stuff, which I use all the time, as many other economists do. They calculated millionaires will get 80% of the tax reduction that comes from not having Obamacare. Bingo. And if you want, you can see this at the end. You can just go to cbpp.org. cbpp.org. You get this document, and it has a wonderful set of charts showing that the people who will enjoy tax savings are the richest people in the United States. The top 1/10 of 1% with incomes above 3.8 million would receive tax cuts, if this repeal goes through, of $195,000 each. Are you ready? Because most Americans can't stand these numbers. And it's not because you don't get the numbers. It's because you don't want to see this. Because this is like a slap in your face while the person slapping you is giggling. Wealthy people in America are going to enjoy a $195,000 reduction in their taxes because there won't be Obamacare anymore. Meanwhile, the press will be telling you all about this or that detail of medical service that isn't good in this thing and that we can do better. Yeah, maybe, but that's got nothing to do with anything. As I tell you sometimes, it's hard to keep a straight face when I explain these things to you. And the only thing that I could do that would make it easier is if between my updates we all stopped and I just played the national anthem to underscore something. One of you asked me a couple months ago, who are the people who earn the most money, the executives in the United States? And since we're on healthcare, I thought I'd answer it by letting you know the results of the most recent research done by the Bloomberg Financial Services people. So you can see it's not quite the political perspective that I would come from, but I'm using the numbers of people who see things differently. Okay, and this is for data as of December 31st, 2016. And they take where are the best paid executives? Where do they get their money? Okay, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 industries. The 10 industries that pay their top executives the most. Okay, at the top of the list, if you can see the diagram where the orange line goes the furthest over, the ones who get the most, ready, here we go, health care. Health care. Let me do this again. Health care. The executives who get the most money, the $1 million and many millions of dollars a year, are in health care. So that you can have this comfort. Yes, you pay more for health care than any other people in any other advanced country. But don't think it goes to waste. It enables these people to be the highest paid executives in the United States, ahead of information technology, which is second, energy, which is third, financials, which is fourth, and consumer discretionary, which is fifth. But health care, you're all paying for health care. And you should feel very proud. The next time you see a very wealthy healthcare executive, remind him or her that it's all through the good graces of your willingness to pay. Next item, public pension crisis in the United States. You're going to be hearing a lot more about this in the years ahead. Public pensions. Let me go over what that means. A pension, for those of you who don't have one, is an arrangement with your employer that while you are working for the employer, a certain amount of money is withheld from your check every week or every month and set aside, often with money matched by your employer, who put both the employer contribution and your deduction from your income into a fund that is invested for you, with the idea being that when you reach the ripe old age of 65 or in that neighborhood, you can retire from that job and you will get a pension. Basically, very important, you will get back the money you've put aside. It used to be called in economics forced savings, because in effect, it's not voluntary. It's taken out of your wealth, your income, and set aside, and you can't really get at it until you become eligible for the pension. Long ago, we understood that this then becomes part of the bargaining between the employer and the employee. When a union, for example, but although it's the same if there is no union, but if a union is bargaining, it says when the contract is over, we are now going to go for a wage increase, let's say 5%, and we'd like another holiday and and we'd like our pensions to be improved. Right now, our pension gives us $18.14 a month, and that's not really enough to feed my cat. Okay? So I'd like to be nicer to my cat, and could you raise the pension? And then there's bargaining. This is very important you understand. And typically what has happened, particularly in the last 30 years, is that employers have figured out, let's offer the worker a bigger pension and say, look, we're not going to give you a wage increase, but we'll give you a bigger pension. You got that? And for a worker, scratching his her head, that sounds okay. I mean, I would have liked more money now, but I'll do without more money now, knowing that when I retire, I will have enough at least to feed my cat, and maybe me too. Okay? In other words, it's part of the deal between a worker and the worker's employer. The same thing happens in the public sector if you work for the city or the state or the federal government as it would if you work for a private employer. We have private pensions and public pensions. Pensions for private employees and pensions for public employees. Now we get to the good and fun part. It's, of course, the job of the employer, in most cases, to put aside what he or she committed to, right, together with the part withheld from your salary, and to invest it properly so it grows and you can be given your pension. But it turns out that the employer, public or private, may not do it. I know this is going to come to you as a shock, but it turns out employers don't always do what they say they're going to do. You know, I hate to be the one to bring this to you, but it is the case. How bad is it in the public sector? The public sector. Well, there may be some of you here, I want you to feel very proud of those of you that come from the state of New Jersey. Is anyone here from New Jersey? Okay. You're the worst state in the union. Your pension is underfunded. Let me give you an idea. The amount of money set aside by the state of New Jersey for the pensions they're legally obligated to give is 35%. 65% of the money needed to give you the pension you are legally entitled to in New Jersey isn't there. The state didn't put it aside. It didn't do what it would have had to do to honor the pledge. And one of the great contributors to this is Governor Krispy Kreme. And I don't want to single him out because, you know, the truth is he's not the only one, and he's not even the major one. But he's one. He's one of them. Now, here's the problem. As people are getting older, which many of you have noticed is happening to you, as you get older and you get closer to 65, you become interested in this subject for a good reason. It's a difference between having hamburger helper or sharing that can with the cat. Right? So you want this. And the government is now telling you, one after the other, it's happening all over the United States, well, it's a crisis. There isn't the money. Because the only way the politicians who played this game can now deal with the problem is either they have to go to the public and get an enormous tax increase now to put the money in they should have put in for the last 30 years, or, by the way, how many of you imagine there's politicians who are eager to go out there and say, I'm really going to tax the crap out of you to give pensions to people? So the way this is being played in the media is, you know, we've been too generous with these working people. The past politicians were too good-hearted and gave you... What? There was no good heart about this. This was a negotiation year after year between employer and employee in which the employees gave up wage increases to get the pension. No largesse by the employer, no kindness, no excess generosity, none of it. But the politicians don't want to have to raise taxes. So what they're going to do is cut the pension benefits. And for those of you that think you have a pension, you don't. At some point, that shoe is going to drop. New Jersey is the worst, followed by, if you want to know, the 6 worst in order, the worst to the least worst. New Jersey, Kentucky, Illinois, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and South Carolina. This is across the country. This is across the... All of these states have less than 50% of the pension obligations they have paid for. And these run in the billions and billions of dollars. This is sitting there like a bomb, waiting for whatever it is that explodes it. It'll be one of the problems that Mr. Trump will have to deal with, because it'll be impossible for the states to manage it on their own. Okay, Jeremy Corbyn. I think I've introduced him to you before. If you're not familiar with him, he's the head of the Labour Party in England. Jeremy Corbyn gets a story in the New York Times once every 4 or 5 days, in which they do a number that would make even the most lame journalism school twitch with the anxiety, since the hostility to him is unspeakable. I mean, they like Jeremy Corbyn less than they like Mr. Trump, and which for the New York Times is extraordinary. What did he get whacked for this week in the New York Times? For proposing a maximum income for Great Britain. Let me do that again. Not a minimum wage, a maximum wage. Not a minimum income, a maximum income. They already have a minimum wage in England. They already don't let it go below a certain amount. Mr. Corbyn doesn't want to let it go above a certain amount. Imagine that. Just think what an idea. A maximum income. So Mr. Corbyn has proposed it as something that Great Britain needs because, and then he gave a lot of statistics, all of which are correct, that the gap, the amount of distance between what a top executive gets and what the average income of a worker in Britain is, has gotten wider and wider over the last 4 or 5 decades, as it has here in the United States as well. What you might not know, and it's a little moment of history that I like to do, as you know, is that this idea of Mr. Corbyn's is taken directly from the United States, because it's part of our history. And if you don't know the history I'm about to summarize for you, then that tells you more about the United States than I can in the rest of tonight's discussion. You don't know? Think about that. In 1944, the State of the Union message by Franklin Roosevelt, sent by the President to the Congress. Mr. Roosevelt proposed a maximum income for the United States. Mr. Corbyn is not the first one. An American president did, and you might be tickled to know. He proposed that the maximum income anybody could get in the United States in 1944 was $25,000 per year. If you adjust that for the fact that prices have risen in America, it would be roughly $400,000 a year now. So the maximum income, no, you can do quite nicely on $400,000. You can put that anxiety about the cat food aside and go out to nice restaurants here in New York. That would be a maximum. Roosevelt sent that to the Congress. The Republicans went ballistic. This is a specialty they've cultivated over the years. They wouldn't have it, and there was a great yelling and screaming and back and forth. And finally, a compromise was reached between the Republicans and the Democrats, because the way that the President Roosevelt wanted to do this was to have a top income tax bracket of, this is cute, 100%. In other words, every nickel you got over $25,000 a year, the tax rate on it would be 100%. In other words, you'd get it, but you wouldn't. Or as fast as you got it, you had to pass it to Uncle Sam. So there was yelling in Congress when the message came, and they finally reached a compromise which the president signed, that the maximum rate was 94%. Today it's 39%. But there was a time in America when Republicans, Democrats, and presidents put a tax on the rich of 94% over a maximum. A tax that got rich people. Mr. Corbyn came up with it, proposed it. The New York Times not only described his work in ways that are beyond partisanship, but of course forgot to include the little historical material that I just gave you to give you a context for it. Okay, next. Because I know that sometimes these sessions with you have me developing things that have happened in the economy in such a way that some of you get a little bit downhearted or depressed or gloomy or begin thinking about heaving yourselves off bridges and things like that. I don't want any responsibility for any of that. And one way to handle it is to include from time to time uplifting stories. So here is an uplifting story, but that has some good economics in it. And I take this, because I like to give credit where I get some of these things from a man named Daniel Zwerdling, who does reporting for the NPR, National Public Radio. And he did a story on the 27th of December, a week or two ago. And I picked up on this and did some more research. This has to do with events that took place in Fridley, I kid you not, Fridley, Fridley, Minnesota. How many of you have been to Fridley, Minnesota? You have? Amazing. If we had more time, I would ask for a description, but I don't. So what happened in Fridley, Minnesota? In Fridley, Minnesota, there is something called the Park Plaza Mobile Home Park. You've got to admire the name. Park Plaza. You know, it's like those apartment houses in New York that have the Shropshire or something across, some demented person with a need to anglicize whatever they were or are does this. Anyway, Park Plaza, a mobile park home. Here's how it works. It works like it did work, like most mobile park homes. It's a capitalist business. Somebody buys some land, buys a bunch of trailers, hooks them up to water and electricity, and then either rents them to people as a rental kind of home or sells them, but requires a big payment every month for the electricity and the water and all the hookups and the mowing the lawn and shoveling the snow and so forth. And that's how the Park Plaza in Fridley worked. But because it was profit-driven, when the snow came, the snow shovelers didn't. And the grass grew, and then there were the people who abandoned their 800-year-old car right in the driveway of everybody. Some of you have been to mobile parks. Maybe some of you have lived in mobile parks. But many of them are not, how shall I say, attractive layouts. And that's because they are run by people trying to make a lot of money and are occupied by people who have not much vested interest in being there, and in fact trying to get out of there as best they can. So these people were suffering, and then they did something which is happening more and more in America, which is why I want to talk to you about it. They found out, I don't know the details of how, but they found out that they could perhaps, with the help of some organizations, convert this place into a cooperative. They could get together. Obviously, I wouldn't be telling you this story if they didn't in fact do it. So this is a story with a happy ending, very happy ending. They found they could. They got the help. They got a loan, and together, as a co-op, they bought the park from the capitalist enterprise that had run it, had started it, and had run it. So now it is cooperatively owned. All the people inside together borrowed, and now they collectively own this park. Wow. This is a owning cooperative, by the way. It's a cooperative of owners. it leaves open the question, oh, a footnote, they're very happy. That's what Mr. Zwerdling's story is about, how gratified they are, how happy, how sad they were they waited so many years, that they didn't do this 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. How they now get together and make sure it looks beautiful, that there's a collective place for their children to play safely, etc. All the things that are nice about where you live, they have done for themselves, often using their own labor and so forth. But they are still in the position of hiring the people who do various parts of the work as an employee group, much as the previous capitalist owner hired people to do work. And in the last year, they've begun to think maybe we should make the cooperative not only how we own our living space, but we also ought to have a cooperative way that the work is done. That the workers, who are either residents or people who come into work, should cooperatively. And why? Because the cooperation that worked so well for them as an ownership principle now strikes them as a better way to organize the work than to have an employer-employee relationship. This is extremely important. They are now struggling, because it's problems with it, but they're struggling to create a worker co-op as the servicer of their ownership co-op of their home. And I think it has 90 units. It's a fairly big one. I say this to you because all of this is going on under the radar. But I want you to see the economics of it. These people who are very low income, trailer parks are not where Trump, for example, does not live in a trailer park and doesn't have any plans, as far as I know, to do that. Poor people have figured out quietly that a cooperative way of owning is preferable to what they had before, and are now in the process of constructing a cooperative work area. These people have voted with their debts they took on as a collective. They're voting with their feet against the capitalist system. They don't talk like that. They don't think like that. They don't even have the vocabulary for it. But it's what they're doing. And the vocabulary often comes later. This is their way out of an intolerable situation that they had to live in within a capitalist framework running their housing. So you might not have expected it at Fridley, but there it is, happening right beneath us, all around us, if only we have the theoretical way to recognize and celebrate it. Just imagine if people understood the transition out of capitalism coming through the transformation of workplaces, of housing, and of workplaces. Imagine if left-wing students and others helped them, were friends of theirs, were allies, helped them to understand how big a transition economically, historically, and politically these people were achieving, made them the heroes that I'm trying to convince you they are, even though they don't know it. It would be one way to make this idea occur to a lot more people across this country if it were celebrated, which is, of course, why I'm telling you about it. All right, next, boycotts. Mr. Trump is making Americans once again aware of the power of boycotts. Some of you have noticed, and we'll be talking about it in a few minutes, that he is saying nasty things about, I don't know, Ford Motor Company, Carrier air conditioners, General Motors, I believe, yesterday or this morning, and several others, Toyota, and so on. Now, you may think that they're all worried about his threat to have a tariff. Yeah, a bit. I'll come back to that later. But they're much more worried about something else. They're worried about getting a bad name. That millions of people who look to Mr. Trump will now think it's not good to buy a Ford car, or it's not good to buy a Carrier air conditioner. In other words, what Mr. Trump is doing is using boycott, or the threat of boycott, by bad-mouthing this or that company to get that company to behave in the way he would prefer them to behave. Okay? I want you to be aware, if you're not, that the other side of the political thing is figuring this game out too. And over the last month, two companies in particular discovered that you could get into a lot of trouble. You could face a boycott if you were seen to be too responsive to Mr. Trump. I don't know if you caught this, but for me, this is very interesting. The first one, a company called LL Bean. You all know that outdoor gear and sort of rough clothing in Portland, Maine, or up in that area. Been around for many, many years, usually by catalog. People buy this stuff. Have many of you heard LL Bean, that kind of stuff? Okay, good. Well, it turns out that LL Bean was founded by, surprise, Leon Wood Bean. In other words, LL himself. He's long gone, but he has a granddaughter and an heir of the company, and her name is Linda Bean. And she is a longtime Republican activist who bankrolled a political action committee in her efforts to support her hero, Donald Trump. Okay, and this information was gathered by people who pay attention to such things, and it went viral, as they say, on the internet, and the orders for Mr. Bean's, LL Bean's materials started diving. So much so that the chairman of the board of LL Bean, a Sean Gorman, a great-grandson of the same LL Bean, issued a political commentary which they have never done before. Quote, "We are deeply troubled by the portrayal of LL Bean as a supporter of any political agenda." In other words, he's disassociating the company from his sister and her institution. Boycotts are a game that can be played by many, many players. Nor is LL Bean alone. Another example, I don't have time to do all of them, but Boston-based sneaker manufacturer, company that you all know, I think, called New Balance. New Balance. Negative publicity came to it. I think that's your head, sir. Okay. Mental telepathy. It's very powerful. New Balance is still grappling with negative publicity that came after it offered favorable comments about Donald Trump's position on global trade last year. Those comments prompted some unhappy customers to destroy their New Balance shoes by lighting them on fire or trying, that's amazing, to flush them down a toilet. However, they did this with a great deal of publicity, and this has hurt New Balance. If you want another symbol or another symptom of a society that is falling apart, we are a society that to express ourselves politically is flushing footwear into the toilet. You have to think about that to understand it. Okay, there is now a group, hashtag #GrabYourWallet, which is organizing boycotts of companies that are supporting Donald Trump or who do business with him and his family. And the companies that they are now boycotting already include TJ Maxx and Marshalls, Filene's Basement, Bloomingdale's, Nordstrom, and others. You will hear more about this as this situation unfolds. Okay. Okay. Last item before we go into the major ones. A wonderful chart. I don't know how many of you can see it. There's a chart about the green line at the top, which goes down, is the percentage of the total income in America earned by the bottom half of our country. the 50% at the bottom. Right? And the orange line is the amount of our income, the percentage of our national income, earned by the top 1%. So here's what this diagram shows. It compares 1962 with 2016. So in other words, the last half century of American history. The bottom 50% had at the beginning roughly 20% of income. 50% of the people got to share 20% of the income. That has gone straight down, so that the bottom half of our population now shares 12% of the income in this country. 50% at the bottom share 12%. What about the 1% richest? They had 12% back in '62, and today they have 20%. Do you understand? The 1% went from 12 to 20, and the bottom 50% went from 20 to 12. A complete reversal. So when you hear arguments about what has happened to the distribution of income, what has happened to wages, what has happened to our economy, try to keep in your mind, since there's a welter of statistics, 2 or 3 that are kind of basic. This is kind of basic. This is a documentation of an immense gap opening up in this society between those at the top and pretty much everybody else. But those in the bottom half, there is no mercy here for them. There isn't any. And maybe on their own, they can find ways to fight back, like the folks in Fridley, Minnesota's mobile home park. But they'll have to find it like that, because this is a system that is simply ripping them down, and it has been, look at the lines if you can see them, straight down, straight up, who the winners are and who the losers are. Okay, let me turn then to the major issues for discussion today, and these have to do with, a lot have to do with Trump and what Trump is doing, but what choice do I have? It's what's in the newspaper every day. It's what is worrying many of you, as it should, and there's a lot going on, much that we don't know, very hard to figure out how much is babble and tweets and so forth and how much is real, but some of the things we can talk about. So let's begin with this business of blocking the movement of jobs to Mexico. He's made as much of that as almost anything else he has talked about, particularly with automobile companies, but not only with them. He is going to stop companies from moving jobs to Mexico. Now, the purpose of this is obvious. He wants to appeal, as he did during his campaign, to workers who are bitter about having no job or having a job that's very poor. They would like to go back to the jobs they once had in things like automobile factories, where there was a strong union, the UAW, and where they got good pay and good benefits and all the rest. And this notion that we're not going to let them go to Mexico is a way of saying we're going to bring this back to you. You're going to have a chance for a decent job, decent benefits, and so on. How is he going to market this to the companies in question? He will make, out of all the automobile companies and all of the others, he will make out of them enemies that will look like what's being done to him by the intelligence community, look like nothing in comparison. They will go after him in ways that I won't even speculate. Why? Because they have invested tens of billions of dollars in these factories, premised on the notion that they could produce these things there and ship them into the United States. What are they going to do? How are they going to recoup all of the money they have invested? Why would they let this president wreck their financial situations by actually doing this? And remind you, I don't know whether he's actually going to do it. It's a little bit too early to tell, but he's acting like he's going to. So let's pursue for a minute. Let's suppose he does. How can he avoid making these companies his sworn enemies? And by sworn enemies, I mean that these companies will shift all of their money to whoever runs against him in the next election. who will shift all their money to stymie his ability to get it through Congress by already acting in the midterm elections that are coming up, et cetera, et cetera. How's he going to do that? He's announced it already. He's going to lower the corporate income tax. Mr. Trump wants to lower it to 15%. By the way, the legal corporate income tax today is 35%. 35% of the profits that a company gets, revenue minus costs, they have to pay a 35% unless they have deduction, which they usually do, but at least legally 35%. They want to reduce that, Trump to 15%, the Republican majority in the House and Senate to 20%. So given that they have the majority of votes, we're going to get a reduction from 35 to either 20 or 15 or some number between them, most likely. That's Mr. Trump's offer to them. You can't produce in Mexico, but don't worry, I'll take care of you by lowering the tax on you. Okay, you all with that? That's how he hopes to get that part done. So now let's follow it out. What happens if you don't tax business at 35%, but you drop it to 15 or 20? A vast amount of money that used to come into Washington from these companies won't be coming in. Okay, now you have to follow the bouncing ball. What's going to happen? There's only two options for the government, really. Either they make up on the taxes no longer paid by companies, because they reduce it, by taxing, ready? You! Raising your taxes to make up for the money that the corporations aren't spending. That would be one thing to do. But the problem with that is if you're all taxed more, you have less money to spend. And if you have less money to spend, you'll buy less stuff. And if you buy less stuff, people will lose their jobs because there's no point in having them hired to produce the stuff you can't buy because you're paying higher taxes. Hello? Might you lose more jobs that way than you gain from the shift from Mexico to, yep. But of course the government may not do that, may not tax you all. Politician doesn't want to do that. So there's an alternative. If you don't get the money from the corporations and you're not going to make the rest of us pay, you can just do less with the government. You know, we don't have the money. So, for example, you know, screw the students. Who needs to give them money? They should be doing it on their own. Private self-reliance should be cultivated in them. And who needs welfare? And who needs food stamps? And who needs all this stuff? But of course, if the government is not going to spend the money, since the companies aren't going to have to give it in the way they used to, and they're not going to tax the mass of people, well then some of the things they won't have the money for is, public employees who will lose their jobs. You know, you understand this business about we're not going to let them go to Mexico and we're going to give them a lower tax. That's a job-killing program. And the big question is, will it kill as many or more jobs than we save from not letting them go to Mexico? Nobody knows. We'll have to see. But the notion that this is a simple idea of getting jobs, that is nonsense. It's really important that you understand that. Okay. What else, however, is Mr. Trump being asked by the car companies to do? Because they see here an opportunity. Big business in America long ago learned an important lesson from Mao in China. When confronted with a bad thing, figure out how to turn it into a good thing. See, a bad thing is the president-elect Trump is making it hard for them to move production to the low wages of Mexican workers. He's making it hard for them. How do we turn this into something good? I got it. Not only should the president cut the income tax on us, but there's something else he can do. And then we'll be more willing to go along with him in this Mexico game. They've already announced it, if you pay attention. They want the miles per gallon rule to be relaxed. See, under Obama, they were supposed to get to a minimum of 50 miles a gallon as the basic efficiency of production by the year 2022. They want that relaxed. They don't want it that high. They don't want it that soon. So one of the things Mr. Trump will be pressured to give them in exchange for the Mexico business is a relaxation. And that means all of you have a better chance of getting emphysema than you had before. That's your part of the Mexican hustle that's being perpetrated on you here. We're still not done. There's another thing the car companies have proposed to Mr. Trump as a quid pro quo to get the movement to Mexico to stop. It turns out that the car and truck companies, they're the same companies, see that their future is in the self-driving vehicle, the self-driving truck and the self-driving car. You've all heard about that, I assume. It turns out that in order for that to work, it's very expensive to build, because you have to, on every road where this is going to happen, all kinds of electronic gear to enable the car's mechanism for self-driving to work. The companies see enormous profits in making self-driving cars if, and only if, they don't have to pay for the devices that are built into the highway. You do all understand, I hope, the economics of automobiles. The automobile was never an efficient mechanism of travel. That's because the only way to make an automobile functional in the United States was to build a highway on which the automobile runs. If the car companies that sell you the car had to build a highway, the cost of the highway would have undone the profits of the car, and we'd all be riding horses. So the way the car companies worked it is, ready? You pay for the road. They make the money off the car. And on behalf of the car companies, thank you. Thank you very much. They're terribly kind of you. You're going to get this hustle again now. You're going to hear about not letting them go to Mexico. Meanwhile, you are going to pick up the bill for equipping the roads to make it possible to fire 2.5 million truck drivers who earn their living in this country that way, who aren't going to have any job anymore. And we will all read in the newspaper 6 years from now how the job losses among truck drivers far outweigh the job saved by not letting them go to Mexico. You get it? Get it now, just for me. So you don't have to wait 3 years to figure it out. That'll be how long it takes the New York Times. Okay, so much for the reality of this hustle of not letting them go to Mexico. It is a hustle, and you have to understand it because we're talking about profit-driven corporations. If you close down the way for them to make more profits in one way, they have 6 others. They have, you know, it's like that little story about the leak in the dikes in Holland, and the water comes through, and the young man puts his finger in the hole, and then like in the cartoon, another hole happens over here, and then he runs out of fingers, and it's over. All that's happening is Mr. Trump, to great fanfare, is closing one avenue, maybe, but all the others are open. And they are going after all of them with the hope that they may do so well on the others that they'll come out ahead even if they can't go to Mexico. Meanwhile, the people who follow this will think they have a champion in Mr. Trump. No, you have a hustler. And he's not that way different from other presidents. This is a hustle to give him a certain patina, a certain image. But the realities are we're stuck in an economic system that always does this to us. And I haven't even given you the biggest one. If the automobile companies really cannot go to Mexico, if that really happens, not only will they do all these other things, make Trump give them all of this other stuff that I've already laid out for you, but the companies will have their own mechanism of coping. If they can't get cheap labor in Mexico, they will do one of two things. Bring the Mexicans here to work in those car factories. And if Mr. Trump closes that off as part of the closing off of migration, then they will be left with the third option, which is called automation. Cars are made by robots already. Cars will be made by more and more robots because the incentive is there. You're not going to pay Americans American wages. That's why you went to Mexico. And the way to save on wages, if you can't go to Mexico, is to require fewer workers at the higher prices and to replace them with machines. And Mr. Trump has said absolutely nothing to indicate he would stop or slow that process. The problem is capitalism. The problem is a profit-driven system that puts employers in a position to forever be sticking it to the working class one way or another. And to get very excited about you're going to stop it over here is kind of silly because that just means they're going to go over there. They know how to do this. They've been doing this for a long time. It's time for us to catch up and realize we've been had it done to us. Don't make another effort to stop this without understanding what you're up against. It's the system that's the problem, not this or that detail. Okay, next. Mr. Trump is talking a great deal about an investment in infrastructure. So let's be real clear what that is. Infrastructure is roads, highways, harbors, all of the stuff that makes the rest of the economy work. You need the roads, you need the harbors, you need all of that. Okay? And we've neglected that in the United States. Why? First, and very important to understand, it's back to the political system we have, the dysfunctional, disorganized political system. Here's how it works. We have working class people, the mass of people over here, and we have rich people and business over here. And they both look to the government for all kinds of services. The rich people want fancy schools, and they want lovely neighborhoods, and they want all of this stuff. The businesses want you to build the road over here and the railroad over there and all the rest, and spend time convincing other countries to buy our stuff and all the rest. And the mass of people, they want stuff too. They want schools and health care and public parks they can have picnics in and all the rest. So you have the mass of people who want stuff from the government and corporations and the rich who want some other things from the government. Meanwhile, the government, in order to provide these things, has to raise taxes. Where else is it going to get the money to do it? So it taxes corporations and the rich, and it taxes the mass of people. But this is now a setup, because of course, in this arrangement, corporations and business would like it if the taxes they had to pay were reduced, while the services they got from the government were enhanced. And the mass of people want the reverse. This puts the politician in an impossible situation. The politician cannot what? He can't satisfy both. He either has to say to one of them, you got to pay more, or I'm going to give you less. And he doesn't want to do that with either one. With the corporations and the rich, they're the ones who fund his campaign. With the mass of people, they're the ones who vote. He's stuck. So what does he do in that situation? Two things, basically, in our society. Both of them nuts. Nuts. But you know, it's hard to explain nuts if you're inside the asylum. So I'm working against the grain here. Here's nuts, number one. One thing you can do is provide all the services to the rich and the corporations and to the mass of people and not tax them. How do you do that? You borrow the money. It's magic. Hello, I'm Governor Krispy Kreme. I'm going to give you everything you want and you don't have to pay any taxes. There's just a bond issue here, see? I have to borrow the money. So he does, knowing that he'll go on to higher office, or in his case, on to, who knows? Lower office is what seems to be in his future, okay? He had his shot at higher office and didn't work out. So Mr. Krispy Kreme took, typical politician, borrow the money, knowing that you're going to go on to another job by the time the payback has to happen. That'll be the problem of your successor. Screw him or her. That's one option. Here's a second option. Don't maintain the infrastructure. Save money. Don't fix the bridge. Don't fix the road. Don't fix anything. Use the money, instead of maintaining the infrastructure, use it to give the corporations what they want without taxing them, and to give the masses of people enough to keep them quiet without raising their taxes too much. The problem of both of these hustles is they don't last forever. Over time, the debts go so high that now the government has to raise money not to do anything, but just to pay back the stupid debt. And that's hard to explain to people. I have to raise your taxes, and as a result of my raising your taxes, I'm going to give you exactly nothing. Why? Because I need that money that I'm raising from you to pay off the debts. Oh, really? Who are the people that you're paying off? Well, who buys state debt in this country? Corporations and rich people. If you're not a corporation and a rich person, ask yourself, how many state bonds do you own? Every one of you in the room. Yeah, you understand, don't you? You're not a major owner of New Jersey bonds, are you? No. That's a rich people's game. So eventually they'll have to raise the taxes, which is already the case. Raise the taxes to get the money to pay off the rich people from whom they borrowed so they didn't have to tax them in the first place. You live in this. Laugh to keep from crying because that's the alternative. So now they come, Mr. Trump, saying he's had it on good authority that the infrastructure of the United States is a disaster, which it is. Our bridges are falling down, our roads are falling apart, everything is a disaster. And so Mr. Trump has come up with a solution. It's called a public-private partnership. Doesn't that sound good? It's like something the Boy Scouts would come up with. What does that mean? Private people, businesses, are going to be asked to invest in the rebuilding of our infrastructure. And the government is going to shovel money in there. But there's a difference between the private money invested and the government. The government uses your and my taxes to help part of the cost of infrastructure. But the other part is private money, and private money wants to be paid back with interest. Well, how are you going to rebuild infrastructure if you have to make money off of it? Well, you're going to have to charge people for the use of the infrastructure to pay off the private. And why do you need the private? Because you neglected it. And why did you neglect it? Because you never taxed the corporations and the rich, which if you had done it at the beginning, none of this would be necessary. Do you understand? You are now being asked to support a solution to a problem we didn't need to have, and we only have because the government cannot tax corporations and the rich, even though they have it because of the political problem, and they can't tax the mass of people because literally they are at the edge already and will make real trouble. So this dysfunctional system is about to become more dysfunctional because it can't let the infrastructure go much further. It's hampering the productivity of the United States in competition with other countries. They dare not raise the money publicly to solve the problem for the same reason they didn't maintain the infrastructure. So we're left with a public-private partnership. We're going to get ripped off again. Finally, the tax cuts, because they are job creators. Now, this is so crazy. This is so stunningly non sequitur, illogic, that it kind of takes my breath away. So bear with me. Let's be sure we understand a tax cut on business. What does a tax cut on business do? Let's be real clear, because it's not difficult. It lowers the tax on the business. That's what a business tax does. That's all it does. So instead of paying $6 million as Company A to the government, you're only going to pay $4. That's a tax cut. That's $2 million that you used to have to pay in taxes that you don't have to pay anymore. That's all that that is. Now the question arises, what is the corporation that gets such a tax cut? And remember, Mr. Trump is about to give them a big one. What is that company going to do with the money it doesn't have to pay in taxes anymore? And the answer is, whatever they feel like. They are not in any way required to use it to hire anybody. Free enterprise means they are free to use the money they don't pay in taxes any way they like. For example, they could raise the salaries of their top executives. Is that legal? Absolutely. Are they free to do that? Absolutely. Is there a limit on their doing that? No. No legal limit. They're free. Here's another thing they could do. They could buy more expensive shrubbery to put around the offices where the executives exist. They could use the money for shrubbery. And that would make more jobs for shrubberers. But probably not too many. Could they take the money and lend it to a foreign government for buying the bonds of a... Of course they could. Do they? Yes. Lots of them do that. How many jobs in the United States does that create? Roughly none. You ready? Now, here comes the best one. Could they take the money that the government no longer takes from them in taxes? That $2 million I told you about? Government drops the taxes, so instead of paying 6, they only pay 4. Now they have the extra $2 million that they don't have to pay in taxes. You know what they can do? They can lend it, ready, to the United States government. What? Yes. And the United States government will be grateful. It will use that money for the infrastructure. And here's the deal for these rich people. Before, they had to pay those $2 million in taxes to the government. End of story. They lose, the government gets, and the government spends. But by giving them a tax cut, which they then lend to the government, these people use the money they used to have to pay as a tax. Now they lend it to the government, which is obliged to pay them back. And during the 2 or 4 or 6 years while they're waiting to have it paid back, they get interest on this. You with me here? If you ask your average rich person, which would you prefer? Would you like to be taxed $2 million? End of story. Or would you like us to not tax you and instead you lend it to us? We'll pay you back and interest while you wait. That takes maybe 2-3 seconds for the average rich person, slow that they often are, to figure out, you know, I think I like this loan arrangement. I like the government to have deficits. I'll give a speech on the 4th of July about deficits. They're inappropriate, but I love them. I own them. I make money off of them. That's how this works. You cut taxes for corporations, they can lend it to the government in a way that hurts all the rest of us because we have to pay that interest sooner or later. Or they can take it and lend it to another government. Or they can invest it in jobs, okay, but jobs in China or India or Brazil. There's absolutely nothing that requires or mandates or guarantees that a tax cut to business stimulates jobs, creates jobs. It's just, I'm going to use a technical term, the claim that a tax cut is a job creator is, to use Adam Smith's words, bullshit. Okay? That's what that is. You probably didn't know that Adam Smith had that in him. He was a professor of religion, he really was, in Glasgow University in Scotland. But when he was confronted with things like this, he sank to a moral low and used terms like that. It's an amazing thing that in our culture you can parlay what corporations want, which is a tax cut, for all the obvious reasons. I just went through some of the things they can do with that money that they don't want to pay in taxes. But to convert that into, we are job creators, that's stunning. That's stunning. That's like going up to a person, punching them right in the nose and explaining how that's a very important way to avoid diabetes later in life. What? But since diabetes is something we all don't want, maybe, who knows? Maybe it'll eventuate in jobs. Okay. I talk a lot about a system, about the capitalist system, and I realize from some of your questions and from what some of you have said that I need to do something in the closing minutes of today, which is to make sure we're all on the same page as to what is meant by this term, capitalism. So let me do it this way. Some of you seem to think that capitalism is about buying and selling things, commodities, using the market as a way of distributing goods from the folks who produce it to the folks who consume it. Markets are indeed an important phenomenon, but they don't have any unique relationship with capitalism. For example, in the American slave South, a different system, a slave system, the goods produced by slaves, for example, cotton, were sold. So you had a market in cotton. You actually had a market in slaves, too. So things were bought and sold all over the place. Markets existed, but you didn't have capitalism. You didn't have an employer and an employee. That's the core of capitalism. Slavery is a different system. It's a master and a slave. The master doesn't hire the slave. There's no need. The master owns the slave. It's very different. In capitalism, the employer doesn't own you. May feel like that occasionally, but he doesn't legally own you. In feudalism, it's yet again different. It's a lord and a serf who kind of belongs on the land, has obligations to the lord, but the lord doesn't hire the serf, doesn't pay him a wage, none of that. But there were markets in serfdom. The unique thing about capitalism is not, therefore, a market. It isn't, never was. The unique thing about capitalism is the relationship in production, in how goods and services are produced. It's a relationship that is not master-slave, that is not lord-serf. It is a very particular arrangement, employer-employee. And in that relationship lies a fundamental conflict. The employer wants out of you as much as he can get while paying you as little as he can get, because that's how he makes his money, and that's how he survives in the competitive struggle with others. It's nobody's fault. It's the way the system is set up. You have to compete against other workers to get that job. The capitalist has to compete against other capitalists to stay in business. And that puts him against you, whether you want to admit it or not. It's a system in which the people who have to cooperate are at each other's throats. And if that strikes you as a bizarre way of organizing production, good. It should. That's like having the family picnic each year organized by the two people in your family who hate each other the most. Not a recipe for a good picnic. Having people at each other who are engaged in an endless struggle, which is not ended by saying, well, we're in this together. I'm the employer, you're the worker. If we work real hard, we'll all be better off. That has some truth to it. But it doesn't negate the fact that you're also, at the same time, ripped up in a conflict with one another. The notion of a collective workplace, a community workplace, or to use another phrase for the word community, get ready, communist workplace, has always been to overcome, to negate, to get rid of this conflict. If all the workers together make a cooperative, then they aren't split between the employers and the employees, because both positions are occupied by every person in the operation. There's no split. That's been the yearning for a cooperative or a community or a collective or a communal or a communist or any one of the other words, to have a different way of organizing the workplace. That's the problem. we don't do something about that in capitalism, we'll always be working with this system or that detail and wondering that as we deal with one, as I've tried to show you, the system has already figured out 6 other ways to get toward the same objective. More money, less for the workers, etc., etc. At some point, working people figure out this doesn't work. That's why we don't have slavery. Not much anymore. That's why we don't have feudalism anymore. Those became unbearable, intolerable as systems. Sure, did they try to make slavery a little less onerous? Sure they did. Did they try to make feudalism less onerous? Yes. But when that didn't last, or when they couldn't achieve it, they finally understood it's the system that has to go. There's absolutely no reason to imagine that capitalism is in any way different. And my guess is that all these signs we see, up until Mr. Trump's golden showers, I'm not saying that they happened. I'm just saying that the heads of our intelligence agencies used that prodigious intelligence to tell us that there was information that this might have happened and that intelligent people should think about it. I find myself intelligent, so I'm thinking about it. The trick is to understand that these are symptoms of a system that may in fact be entering on to a time of dissolution. And just like every other system that dissolved, capitalism will too, which means it's always on the agenda to wonder, maybe it's now. Thank you very much. I will see you